It is. These days it is exciting because things are changing so fast in the media world, especially journalism, that old men like me just can't keep up. Really, ask him. Everything about journalism, I think, is changing except what it is and why we do it, which is the important part. I tell all my students that you need to be really good on at least 3 platforms these days to get a job in journalism. There's no more just I'm a writer, or I'm a reporter, or I'm a photographer. Everybody's got to do everything. That's what they want to see out there. At the same time, I tell them, don't ever forget that those are just tools. Those are ways to tell a story, and some of them are marvelous ways. The things you can do with the internet to tell stories are just incredible. But they're just tools. What you have to remember is why we're there, what we're doing. We're doing journalism. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to do journalism? You can get a bunch of different definitions, I suppose. Mine is very simple. To be a journalist is to be a person who goes out to find and tell the truth as best they can. That's it. Find and tell the truth. Which is a difficult job. Because no matter where you are, or what kind of journalism you're doing, you'll find out very quickly that everybody lies. The problem is not gathering information. Everybody wants to tell you something. But you got to figure out which ones are true and which ones are lies. And by everybody, I mean everybody. I mean the American government, the American military, foreign governments. Everybody will sooner or later tell you a lie for some purpose. Not just off the cuff, but they have their own agendas, they have their own goals, and you have to sort it out. And these days, it's even more of a deluge of information. You guys have literally at your fingertips more information available to you than anybody in the history of the world. You can get on that machine and find out almost anything. In terms of background, in terms of knowledge, it's just there, instantly. But, as I've told my class at UF, you also have to have a large part of that in your head. It's incredible the amount of information that you have to know to be a decent journalist. Because you never know what you're going to be covering. Never. Ask Sam Koo, who was the Vatican correspondent for the AP for many years, a cultured and elegant gentleman, Korean American, whose wife was a concert cellist and her sister a concert violinist. He ended up coming to Beirut to cover the war. Now, it was a big shock to him. And the next time I called him to ask him to come, he kind of said the only time I've ever heard him curse. But you never know what you're going to do. You could be working in a small town newspaper when the town's hit by a tornado. What do you got to do? You got to cover it. And to do that, see, you have to know already what's happened. Because if you don't know what's happened in the past, how do you know what's new? You know, the new part of news? If you don't know what the mayor has said before, how do you know when he makes a surprise announcement? How do you know when he changes a policy? How do you know when the city council is trying to slip one over on their town? If you don't have the background, if you don't know a lot. And unfortunately for you guys, because it's not a habit I bet you have, that means reading a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean reading dead trees. You can do that on the internet too. I have an ebook. I love it. But you got to read a lot, constantly. If you're just getting your news from television, you don't know very much at all, let me tell you. You should, and this, and I'll include the PR people too in this. To be educated, to be knowledgeable about what's going around you, to be a decent citizen, you need to read a lot. Not one source, 3, 4, 5 sources. Plus, what you get off of television, which frankly isn't much in the way of facts, but hey, pictures are good. Actually, I'm being facetious. Television can be a marvelous tool that can have great impact. Pictures of the Twin Tower, they'll be with us for the rest of our lives. Their history. How many of you have seen that picture of that little Vietnamese girl running down the road after being caught by a napalm attack? That picture will be with us for the rest of the world. It can be extraordinarily powerful. Unfortunately, too often, the infotainment part gets in the way of the journalism part. But I'm not going to I'm going to criticize television for an hour. Which reminds me, when do I have to wind this up?
I don't know.
When do you guys got to go?
Around noon, I guess.
Okay.
Would you like me to give a little précis of your...
Okay, I just started talking before the bell went.
This
You were supposed to introduce
jazz
me.
on us here, which is cool.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I just thought I might give you a little background on Terry's amazing career. Obviously, he's a prominent and a very special journalist who has worked in Asia and Africa and the Middle East. He worked in Tokyo. He worked in South Africa, which is where he was when he came up in 1982 to help cover the war in Lebanon, which was...
In his bureau, he was running it at the time.
Indeed. And he's been a newspaper editor and a documentary producer, and he's written a book about his experience being held by Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed group in Lebanon. It's called The Den of Lions.
It's out of print, but you can get it on the web if you really want to look at it.
Amazon.com
Yeah.
will meet your need. Terry was held for 7 years as a hostage, the longest of the hostages taken in this period of time. And I think it started in 85 and ended in 7 years later. So, and we met him at AP headquarters when he got out. There were hundreds of reporters that swarmed him in the street, gave him a big hug, and welcomed
He was
him
one of
back.
them, and he got, the picture of the two of us was one of the most used pictures on that day. This is Nick giving me a big hug. And of course, right in the middle of the picture, as if he planned it, was my bald spot.
Well, at least you have a spot. I don't. So he has numerous awards in journalism, and he's the honorary chairman of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and a former Marine who did two tours in Vietnam. He's also the co-chair of the Vietnam Children's Fund. And among his diverse hobbies are cave diving and horses. And he's cared for and been kicked by several horses, one of which changed the course of his movie career.
Yeah. She kicked in the whole side of my face. It took 2 plastic surgeries to make me look this pretty. Yeah.
So just one last thing. I mean, he mentioned Sam Koo earlier, a wonderful journalist, and this was, in a way, my introduction to this aspect of Terry. It was context was West Beirut, where the Palestinians, the Syrians, and Lebanese militias were backed up against the sea after Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, and with a Christian militia was shelling, bombing, and attacking the forces who were firing back out of West Beirut. It was a very dangerous time, and what the reporters were tasked with doing was running out to see what the impact of some of these bombs were, a lot of which hit civilian areas, hit orphanage, I remember, in a hospital and an old folks home. And one day it hit this building and knocked it down, and there were people trapped inside, and Terry and Sam went to cover it. And the area had been bracketed by 2 car bombs, and they went off, and just the people they were interviewing around them were killed, many of them, and wounded. And Terry came running back to the office and shouted up from the ground that asked if Sam had returned, and in fact he hadn't. And Terry rushed back there, even though this place had been attacked twice within a few hours, and found Sam, who was, I guess, dazed and very much out of it and wandering around, and brought him back to the office. That was certainly a demonstration of his courage.
I thought he was dead. The woman he was talking to before the car bomb went off was killed. I saw her. In fact, there's some television footage of that event.
Yep.
And you can see there's this woman in a flower print dress, Palestinian woman, crying because her family's in the building, and Sam was trying to talk to her when the bomb went off. And when I pulled myself together and got up, because it knocked everybody down, all I could see were bodies. And I looked at it, the woman was laying there dead. She'd been hit in the chest by something. So I thought, I gotta find Sam. Luckily, he was okay. Although I think that was pretty much the end of his time in West Beirut.
It was.
Yeah. Poor Sam. The saga of Sam goes on because he went to East Beirut. He said, look, I just can't do this. And you know what? Not everybody can do that kind of thing, nor should. So Nick sent him back to East Beirut on the other side, where it was safer, to help out there. He walked out of the hotel for lunch one day, walked around the corner, and a car bomb blew the face off the hotel. And he went up to Bob, with the Army headquarters, Lebanese Army headquarters, with a driver to renew his press card, to get his press card actually, because he didn't have one. And he got caught in a shelling attack, and the driver rolled the car down the hill. They got cuts and bruises, they weren't hurt. And then he got on a plane and went home.
Nobody would ride with him anymore.
That's the saga of Sam Coote. Okay, where should I start? When I was a journalist, I pretty much covered hard news most of the time. I was a street hack, that's what you call it, in Asia and Africa, and then in Beirut. I wasn't widely known for my feature writing, but I did a lot of hard news coverage. And when I got taken and tucked away in a basement for 7 years, series of basements and cells, what you do when you're alone, I had something like a year in solitary confinement. You think, right? You got nothing else to do. All I had in my cell, I remember, was a little mattress and a water bottle and a pee bottle and a bunch of spiders and some rats from time to time. And that was it. So you go back in your head and you think about what you've been doing, what you did wrong, what you regret, what you don't. I had never thought very much about journalism while I was doing it. I liked it. I felt strongly about it, but I just did it. And I was a pretty good writer, so I didn't have to think much about that. When I was sitting there in that cell, one of the things I thought a lot about was what I had done with my life. Because at that time, I didn't know if I was getting out alive. None of us did. And some of them didn't. And I thought about it. I'd been a journalist for quite a while. And was that a good use of my life? Was that something that I would do again if I had the chance? Other than play tennis on Saturday morning. And I concluded after a while, yeah. It had been worthwhile. It had been something worth spending most of my life on. And I concluded that for a number of reasons, which I'll talk about in a bit. Then I came home to this wonderful welcome. Everybody was so happy to see me. I was the longest held American hostage. A crown, by the way, I just gave up to that poor guy in Syria, in Iran. And I had a wonderful welcome home. I had a ticker tape parade in New York. You know, everybody loved me. Everybody was happy to see me. I did some things. Took a while to get functioning again. You know, you can't go through something like that and just not be damaged in some way. And we all were damaged. Took a while to realize that some of that. Took sometimes years to figure out just what was wrong with you. I'm not sure I have ever. But eventually somebody asked me if I want to teach at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. One of my friends was on the faculty there. And they called me up and said, you want to teach a class as an adjunct? And I thought, sure, why not? I know this stuff. I've done it for a long time. I can teach it. So I taught a class. I learned very quickly that I didn't know how to teach. Okay. My idea was, I know it, you don't. I talk, you listen. That doesn't work. But eventually I learned how to be a better teacher. I stayed at Columbia for several years. Since then, I've taught at Ohio University, at Kentucky, Syracuse for a year as a visiting professor. And now I'm at UF. I'm retired, but I'm teaching part-time just to keep my hand in. And that's when I started really thinking about journalism, because I had to talk to people about it. I had to teach students. So I had to know myself, what is this and why do we do it? It's not so much the how. I mean, journalism is a bit of a trade school, but it's more important than that. But the why. Why do people do this? You know, we're not popular. We're down there along somewhere with lawyers, I think, way at the bottom. But we still feel strongly about it, the journalists who do it. We still feel that it's worthwhile. Why? Well, one of the things that I did when I came home was I joined the board of directors of a group called the Committee to Protect Journalists. It was a fairly young group then, and I've been on the board for 20 years. I'm now the honorary chair. It's a group in New York that works on behalf of journalists under attack around the world. And in prison, tries to get them out, supports their family. It's a very fine group of professionals, and they spend a lot of money. They got a budget now of like $4 or $5 million, and they're quite effective. You'd be surprised what you can persuade people to do, even foreign governments. We tell them quite regularly, you know, you put this guy in jail because you wanted him to shut up. Guess what? We're not going to shut up. And sometimes that works. But what it did was bring me in contact with a lot of people around the world in some pretty difficult places who go to work every day not knowing if they're going to be alive or free at the end of the day, or if they're going to be kidnapped or if they're going to be beaten. They don't know. And they do it anyway. I'm not sure I could do that every day, but they do, in places like Nigeria and Vietnam and other places around the world, lots of them. And the question is, why do they do it? They do it because they think it's important. And another question, why do the people do it to them? Mostly their own governments, by the way. They do it because they know it's important too. They know they cannot oppress their people, they cannot deprive them of their rights in the face of a free and active press. You cannot have a free society without a free press, period. It's never been done. That's why it's important. Now, you could talk about a lot of different roles that journalists play. The watchdog role over government, right? The public forum of letting people discuss things in a community. There are a number of different exact roles that we serve. But basically what it's all about is, as I said, finding and telling the truth. You cannot judge your government, your leaders, if you don't know what they're doing. If somebody's not there watching them and telling you what they're doing. Because all governments, all bureaucrats try to hide information. It's in their nature. And it won't change. It's like trying to stop a puppy from peeing on your carpet. You just can't do it. And that is true of our own government as well. Now, I worked overseas, okay? And everybody thinks, oh, wow, foreign correspondent, dangerous. Yeah, it's getting more and more dangerous than it ever has been because journalists are targets now rather than just bystanders and accidental victims. They go out to get us. And quite often, as we've seen in the Middle East, when they get us, they kill us. But it's still true of people like you who may never go overseas, who work in the United States, maybe on a small town newspaper, maybe on a city newspaper, maybe a television station. Every time you go to a city council meeting, every time you insist that a planning and zoning commission be held in public, every time you check the mayor's expense accounts, you are defending our freedoms. And if you don't, we won't have them. And I'm afraid right now we're not doing a good enough job because we're losing some of our freedoms. Personal opinion, I'm not a journalist anymore, so I can have a personal opinion in public. I think we've done more damage to ourselves since 9/11 than any group of terrorists could ever do to us. Our government unashamedly now is spying on everything we do. Every stroke of your computer when you're on the internet, somebody's recording. Phone calls are tapped without warrants. Our government now puts people in jail without benefit of lawyer or charge. Endlessly, sometimes. They even admit that some of those, many of those people in Guantanamo don't have much to do with terrorism. They say that, but they still won't let them go. There was a guy, Canadian, of Arab descent, who was picked up by the CIA and renditioned, what a nice word, to Syria, where they handed him over to the Syrians to be tortured. The Syrians eventually let him go after much pain and a long time. He went back to Canada and he sued the Canadian government, which had fingered him to the CIA as a terrorist suspect. He won. He proved in court that he didn't have anything to do with terror. Didn't have anything to do with any radical group. They gave him $2 million in compensation. He then came to the States and he sued the US government for kidnapping him and handing him over to Syrians. Guess what? The government refused to appear in court. They told the judge, you have no right to question us. And the judge agreed. They said in public, they claimed, our government, that US government officials cannot be held accountable for kidnapping, for torture, for anything else, anything they may do. And the court agreed. Tell me we're not losing some of our rights. Tell me that our reaction to that act of terror on 9/11 has not grievously harmed us as a society. Ask Edward Snowden. I'm sure he doesn't really like Russia. I think he should be given black tie dinners and awards, not made into a fugitive. This is the first time since his action that we have had a serious public discussion about what our government is doing. First time. Isn't that a good thing in a democracy? Isn't that the way it's supposed to work? Even if he did sign a paper saying that he wouldn't reveal classified information, the courts have always allowed judges to weigh, in cases of classified information being leaked, the public good against the government's need for secrecy. That's something that they can consider. And in the past, they have often said, the public good outweighed the government's need. We're not going to prosecute this guy. We're not going to find him guilty. This government, President Obama, who I cheered when he was elected, like many Americans, I was joyful. Unfortunately, has prosecuted more leakers than any administration before him, including Nixon. I don't have an understanding, I don't have a real explanation for that, but it's true. They are withholding more information from you than they ever have. They've actually gone out into the public pool of information and taken things back and labeled them a secret that were public. I mean, isn't it too late? Anyway, that's my personal view, and I know people do disagree with me. I don't know how many times or in how many different ways it's been said, but buying temporary security by giving up your rights gives you neither. Okay, back to journalists. Working with these guys overseas has made me realize just what it is we do as journalists, what we're supposed to be doing as journalists, what it means. And you really need to keep that in mind. When you're reading the newspaper or reading the web is hard to deal with because there's so much information. How do you know what's right? How do you know what's wrong? How do you know who's telling the truth and who isn't? Because it's so easy to disguise who's doing the writing. You have to develop critical thinking, just like any journalist, whether you're a journalist or not. You have to be able to judge who you're going to believe, who has the authority, who has the credibility that will allow you to trust them on the web. That's your responsibility. I can't tell you how many students I've run into who quote something off the web because it's on the web. Like we used to say, it's in the paper, it must be true, right? That's a dangerous way to go about it. It really is. And the other thing you have to do to be a critical thinker is you have to get your information from lots of different places, because that's how you begin to know what's trustworthy and what's not. And be sure to include in there some people that you don't agree with. We have this tendency, and the web allows us more and more, to tailor our news to our preconceptions, to our beliefs about the world. You know, to the extent that a test once revealed that when people read the newspaper, they literally do not see stories that they don't believe in. That tell them things that they don't want to believe. They simply don't see them, pass right over them. People have screens that they see the world through. And if the news that I'm trying to tell you doesn't fit what you believe about the world, you'll reject it. And that's more and more common today. Don't do that. Listen to the people who make you uncomfortable. You cannot learn anything by remaining in your comfort zone. All learning takes place outside your comfort zone. So you should spend some time traveling out there. You don't have to believe everything, but you do have to listen. We have, in this society today, come to a place where seemingly in public discourse, truth, logic, and fact have little to do with what people believe. If people don't like what you're saying, they simply won't believe you, whether or not 90% of the scientists in the world agree with you, or that you can prove it with fact. They don't care. Do you know that a large portion of America, something like 25 or 30%, still believe that Saddam Hussein was involved in the World Trade Center bombing? Now, anybody who knows anything about the Middle East knows that that's absolutely not true. Al-Qaeda hated Saddam Hussein, so did most of the Muslims in the world. He wasn't even really a Muslim. Syria was a socialist country, Socialist Ba'ath Party ran it. I don't think Saddam Hussein had seen a prayer rug until the bombs started falling. But a large portion of America believes it. A large portion of America believes that somehow Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And we know for a fact that that's not true. The only weapons of mass destruction, specifically poison gas, were leftover bombs that we helped him to build before he became our enemy. Bless you. When he was our bad guy, we gave him the technology and put him in touch with people to build up a poison gas reserve, which he used on the Kurds. But they were buried, and now we're discovering them again. Our soldiers who were over there cleaning up are getting sick from them. I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what to say about having an argument with somebody who simply doesn't live in the same universe you do. He doesn't believe in the same kind of facts that you do. Won't accept any proof that you'll offer to make an assertion. How can we run a country like that? Again, that's the job of journalists. Our job is not to say on this is what the Democrats say and this is what the Republicans say. No, that's not our job. Too often that's what we do these days because we're afraid of making a statement and being criticized. Our job is to tell you what the truth is. But, as I said, we're not doing it well enough. We obviously are not doing it well enough. We need to do it better. And that's why, again, I tell my students, we discuss objectivity, which is coming under challenge these days. Journalists are supposed to be objective. But the modern belief is you can't do that. You can't be objective. Everybody has opinions. Everybody has experience, and that's going to show. I don't believe that, because the objectivity we're talking about is not about what you believe or what your opinion is or what you think about some subject. It's about the process that you use for doing journalism. We are professionals. We are trained and able to put our opinions aside, keep them out of our stories. That's what it means to be a professional. That's what objectivity is. It is telling the whole truth, not just one side, but the whole thing. There are good journalists, there are bad journalists. My favorite example of the latter is a guy named Jerry Rivers. How many of you know who he is? He's from the Bronx. Oh, yeah, they call him Geraldo Rivera these days. It is possible and it is necessary to be objective in order to be a good journalist. But objectivity does not mean detachment. It does not mean that you shouldn't be passionate. I am very passionate about journalism, good journalism. I believe in it strongly, and I feel strongly when I see it done well, also when I see it done badly. If you're not passionate about journalism, you probably shouldn't be doing it. You should do something else. Because chances are it ain't going to make you famous and it ain't going to make you rich. But what it will do is give you a job that is incredibly exciting and interesting all the time. Rarely boring. It gives you not just a ringside seat, but a center ring seat. The most important events that you'll ever see. And think about it. Even a young journalist can go ask impertinent questions of important people, and they'll mostly try to answer. They may lie, but they'll answer. You get to investigate just about anything you want. If you have a decent boss who'll let you go out and learn. You learn all your life. You never stop learning. Never. I went, first overseas I went to Japan. I was married to a Japanese wife, so I already knew quite a bit about Japan. I served there in the Marine Corps. But I went to Japan, I studied Japanese history, Japanese economy, Japanese politics, which I could never get Nate to take seriously. He didn't care. Most people don't. I became, quite knowledgeable. And then they started sending me other places in Asia, to Korea. Different society, different people, different history, different culture. And then they sent me to Taiwan, and then to Thailand, and I'd start over there. Then they sent me to South Africa, God only knows why, which is a completely different place, completely different people. It was 1981, 1980, deep in the depths of apartheid. It was a pretty awful place to be, unless you were an Afrikaner. But again, and I was not just working in South Africa, I was a Southern Africa news editor, so all those countries around it, Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Zambia and Zaire, I had to learn all about them too. So I did. And then the Israelis invaded Lebanon, and I ended up going north in an Israeli army jeep behind a bunch of Israeli tanks in Lebanon, where I'd never been before. Knew nothing about the Middle East other than what I'd read in the newspaper. I didn't last long with the Israelis. In fact, they pulled my press card the first day, but that's another story. Israelis are easy to get into fights with. They like to fight. Arguments, I mean. And I went up to Beirut, first in East Beirut, and then I called Nick and asked him if I could come into West Beirut. And he said, "Who the hell are you? And what do you got that I need?"
I didn't say that.
Oh, that was your attitude. But
Make up the quotes there.
he brought me over to West Beirut, and I started over again. 8 major factions of the PLO. 8 leaders with different war names. I had, who's who. Like Yasser Arafat is not Yasser Arafat to anybody. He's Abu Ammar, or the old man. His chief military guy, Khalid al-Wazir, was Abu Jihad. They all had different names, which you had to know if you were going to know who anybody was talking about, and who was behind each faction. Different country for just about all of them. And then you had, the Lebanese, 3 major groups and a whole bunch of minor ones in each group, all of them with different interests and different histories. And then there were the Syrians. And who else was out there? The Iranians were there, the Libyans, Iraqis. Lebanon was quite the playground during their long civil war. Very complex. And then I succeeded him as chief Middle East correspondent. Somebody thought I'd learned enough, I guess, I don't know. And I had to go through this whole process with the rest of the countries in the Middle East, which were now under my purview. Like I said, you never stop learning. If you like to learn, being a journalist is a good place to do it, because you will never stop learning. There's always something more that you have to know. And I don't mean be able to find on Google. I mean stuff back in a corner in your head there that you can pull it out when you need it. It's an incredibly interesting job. And being chief Middle East correspondent, I can tell you right off, was the most fascinating job I've ever had. It is absolutely all-encompassing. It takes all of your professional and emotional, even physical ability. We worked long hours every day, often. Sometimes there were pauses where you could have a halfway normal life, but they didn't come all that often during the Civil War. But it was fascinating. And I'm not an adrenaline junkie. My daughter calls them war boys, young freelancers who just got to get out to the front to get shot at, and they think they're building their reputation somehow, and it is exciting. Winston Churchill wrote in 1896 in a book called The Malaching Rebellion, "There's nothing in the world so exciting as being shot at without effect." The without effect part is important. There is an adrenaline thing going when you're in the middle of something like that. But that's not why I did it. And it's not why I think most good journalists do it. Journalists are often risk takers, but the good ones take considered risks. They know what's going on in general, and they're careful about what they do. It does you no good whatsoever to get killed finding a story, because you can't file the damn thing. So you've served no purpose. And luckily, while he and I were in Beirut during the Civil War, no AP people got killed. Very few of them got hurt. Jerry got hit in the head by a ricochet. And some of our staff...
Fell in the pool.
Yeah, cousin fell in the pool where there's no water, the deep end. And several of our staff were kidnapped briefly, but released, but nobody got killed in a very vicious and violent war, because we knew, look, if I'm going to go from here to there, and that's dangerous, somebody's going to be shooting at me, there damn well better be something I think is over there that I need. I'm not going over there for the view. I'm going there to learn something that I need to learn. And I think about that before I do it. And I think that's the way most good journalists operate. Good journalists have a sense of indignation, really, I think. They want to reach out there and take you by the collar and shake it and say, hey, look at this. This is important. You need to know this. That's what kind of moves them. But not very many of the good ones are adrenaline junkies. They're not. And they're not in it for the fame. I don't believe that I can make people into journalists. I can teach them how to do it. I can help them do it better. But if they don't have that thing in them that says, I need to find this thing out and tell people about it, I don't know where I can put it in them. So if you're not passionate about journalism, please, PR is a nice career. You'll make more money. We've got lots of second-rate journalists. We don't need any more. Okay? So there's a half an hour or so's worth of thoughts on journalism. What do you guys want to talk about? What do you want to ask? Yeah.
What was your first job?
In journalism? I was a Marine newsman at Far East Network in Japan. I had been working in an office there for the Marine Corps, and there was a AFRTS radio station on base, so I got to know the guy and I got interested in the Far East Network, and I re-enlisted to be assigned to the Far East Network, which was a news network, and they sent me to Tokyo. And I walked into the Far East Network headquarters and they said, do you want to be a disc jockey or a newsman? I said, well, I hadn't thought about it. Newsman. He said, okay, here, take this script and go in the booth and read it live on the network. It's a military network. What the hell? They don't care. And I did. And then I started learning. We had a young Navy guy there, Neil Curry, who had worked for CBC and CBS. He was really good, and he joined the Navy. Nobody knows quite why, and you don't ask those questions. But he taught me to write for broadcast. I used to carry around in all my moves the first story he edited for me, which was all red marks. It had like 3 words left in it. But I misplaced it over the years. And I learned how to write, and I learned how to report, and then they sent me to Vietnam as a combat correspondent. Okay, that's being a journalist of a sort. You're only allowed to tell one side of the story. But it is being a journalist, and what we did as combat correspondents was go out into units that were involved in combat. When something would happen of a big enough nature, the master gunnery sergeant would come by and say, Sergeant Anderson, let's go, pick up your pack, and you had a pack ready. And you go out to the 1st Marine Division Hospital outside of Da Nang, and wait for the medevacs to come in, drop off the wounded, and you'd get on when they went back for more. So you knew you were going into some place where people were being shot. And then you'd live with the unit for however long. I think the most time I ever spent with one unit was about a month in the mountains. My uniform, my utilities literally rotted off me from the triple canopy jungle and constant rain and humidity. And I learned something about reporting from people who were professionals. My boss then was a former journalist and a Marine, and there were others there. I came back to the US. I was on recruiting duty in Des Moines, Iowa. First time in 5 years, right? I got my dress blues, which is why I joined the Marine Corps in the first place. Pretty uniform, right? I was 17. I got my dress blues, and they sent me out into the state around the high schools and stuff, and people were spitting at me and burning flags. It was 1970, Cambodia invasion. You probably don't even know that. It's a different history. That's when all of America was revolting against the war. And Marines in dress blues were not welcome. So I got out and I went to school at Iowa State, took a journalism and political science double degree, which I have to say that political science was of more use, I think, but I learned a lot more about journalism. And I worked full-time at a radio and TV station while I was in school. And then the AP hired me, fired me, laid me off. I ran a newspaper, was news editor of daily newspaper for a year and a half, so, and the AP called me back. And the AP has always been my home. I still say we when we talk about the AP, and it's been 20 years since I left. It is a marvelous organization. I mean, us old farts kind of resent some of the changes they've made. You know, it's better in the old days. But they're still the largest and I think best news organization in the world. And they provide news to more people than anybody else, believe me. Believe me. So, there's a long answer to a short question. I tend to do that, yeah.
What other news sources do you frequent or find most credible, and what tools do you use to fact check them?
Okay, I forgot about the microphone. We all did, didn't we? Okay, my daily routine. Now, I'm not a practicing journalist, but I do teach journalism, and I demand that my students read the New York Times every day, look at Al Jazeera every day, listen to NPR or read their page, at a minimum. That's what I expect of my students. And I test them on current affairs. You cannot hope to be a journalist unless you have some knowledge of what's going on in the world. So I get up. When I get to my computer, well, first of all, I'm the only person in the apartment complex that still gets the New York Times at his door. I like the feel of a dead tree newspaper, what can I say? But I also read it online when I can, when I don't have time. I read also Al Jazeera. The reason I require that is because it gives you a different view of the news than you get from normally American news sources. Look at NPR, try to read The Economist every week. I have a list of about 35 or 40 websites that I visit, blogs mostly. Some of them are journalists' blogs, news blogs, like ProPublica and some of the others, the international, ICRJ, things like that. And a bunch more are simply generic, not generic, but general blogs on race, gender, things like that. I also teach diversity. Okay, so I like to read lots about that. I know you're looking at me saying, "What is a fat, white, middle-aged, older guy doing teaching diversity?" But, hey, it works for them, so I do it, and I like it. I really like it. It's one of my favorite things to do because you guys don't think about these things much. When was the last time? Well, some do, but when was the last time most of you had a serious conversation with your friends about race? You haven't? Good. Good. Because most people don't spend time. And they don't know what they're seeing on television. Diversity in the media. is a major issue now. You've seen that new show. What's the name of it? It's something about a white man or something like that. I forget. Yeah, it's a new show just coming up.
Blackish?
No, not Blackish. That's another one.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right?
yeah, but I can't think of it.
I can't think of the name. Anyway, it's supposed to be. It's just going to start, I think, in a week or two, and it's supposed to be very good. We don't, in general, in America, have good conversations about race or gender, and that's unfortunate because I got to tell you, this is a racist and a misogynistic country. And I know a lot of people won't believe that statement, but come take my diversity class. So we should be talking about it, and we should be thinking about it. We don't often enough. Anyway, another long answer to a short question. Go ahead.
I just want to know like what tips and pointers you would give, like just like short pointers that you give us for the future.
If you want to be a journalist,
Yeah, or just like in
Well-
I'm a communication major with track of advertising.
okay, communication majors.
So it's just in that field, just any advice in the future, like things like don't be late or
Okay, yeah. Look, you all know about that stuff. I'll tell you one thing though. If you're going to be in the communications business, learn how to communicate. Learn how to write, for God's sakes. Okay? Too many people are graduating from college without the ability to write a basic English sentence properly. And I will tell you, John Danishevsky, the guy we were talking about, the international, the head of international news for the AP, talked to my class on Skype, bless you, on Skype a couple of weeks ago. And I asked him, for the benefit of the class, John, what do you do when you get an application that has a grammatical error on it? And he said, well, we throw it in a wastebasket. Whether you're a PR major or an advertising major or a journalism major or just about any career you might have, you got to be able to write properly. Communication is your business, and words are what you use. So if you can't use them properly, how far are you going to get in your business? You know, I tell my students, you're a junior or a senior in college. You are way beyond the place where you should be making any grammatical errors whatsoever. You simply shouldn't be doing it. Yeah, oops. And they still do, and I mark them off for it. Especially if they're journalism majors. What the hell, you want to be a journalist and you can't write? Oh, please, go take an English class. And that's serious advice. You have a much better chance of getting a job and being successful in a job if you can communicate properly.
You said earlier that you believe that we did more harm to ourselves as far as the American people because of 9/11. Since people might be starting to settle down now and starting to feel a little bit safer, they have the illusion of feeling safer. Do you see more of a divide happening between the government and its people because journalists might start taking more risks because people are starting to settle down from the whole ordeal?
I don't think that has much to do with journalists taking risks, but yeah, there is a divide in this country, and it's an odd one, because it's the very conservative people who are generally in favor of all this spying and torture business, but it's the conservatives who hate the government, who want the government off their backs. So that doesn't make sense, does it? But that's the way it goes. And it's,
Do you
yes.
see the divide getting worse over time as people start to, come out of their shell, feeling safer, the divide between government and
I hope they're feeling safer, and I hope at least half of the country is going to try and tell the government, yeah, we don't want you to do this. We don't want this going on anymore. Look, there are people out there who want to harm us. There are people out there who want to kill us, right? The most successful act of terror against the United States, the bombing of the World Trade Center, killed 2,700 people, about. It knocked down two of our most famous buildings. How much actual harm did it do America? Didn't hurt our economy. I had some money being handled by people who were in the World Trade Center. The company was in the World Trade Center. And they lost people in that disaster. They called me up 2 days later and said, your money's safe. It was all backed up in New Jersey. Nobody lost any money except the people who had things in the safe deposit boxes in the basement. Because all of our money is virtual now. It's in a computer someplace, backed up by 3 other computers if it's a reliable thing. So how much harm, again, did they do besides, yes, it's awful, they killed 2,700 people. But were they able to stop Wall Street, to ruin our economy, to what, to do anything? No. And right now you can look out my daughter's window in New York and see the World Trade Center sticking right back up there like a big finger. Which is what I think they should have done immediately. The people who are involved in terror simply aren't capable of anything but making us mad and making us think that we're in great danger. We're not. The world is a much safer place than it was for a long time, for us anyway. Crime in the United States is at levels that were current in 1970s. That's how low they are. But crime on television is constant. That's why you all think you're scared. That's why people are paranoid. They feel like, they got to carry a gun or whatever, because they're told constantly by television and the movies and, even some of the television news that it's a dangerous world. Look at Ebola. The incredible panic that caused by Ebola. And they just announced, by the way, Nigeria is Ebola-free. They said yesterday Senegal is Ebola-free. It killed a bunch of people there, but it certainly didn't escape to ravage the world. And how many people have died in the United States? 2, I think, so far? 1? 2, I think it's 2. Have you watched CNN lately? You know they're going to change their name from CNN to, oh shit, I'm scared. That's the kind of harm we've done ourselves. It's sad, and I think our government security apparatus is totally out of control, completely. There's nobody that can tell them to stop doing this stuff. They don't need to listen to everybody's conversations. They don't need to be arresting people without charge and trying them in military courts. We don't need that in order to be safe. Yeah.
What's the most important thing you learned while being in captivity, other than the fact that you know that you made the right decision to become a journalist?
The most important thing, well, that's hard. The most important thing I learned, I won't restrict it to those 7 years, but in my career as a journalist and as a hostage, I think probably the most important thing I learned is that ordinary people are capable of doing extraordinary things when they have to. We were very ordinary, fairly ordinary people. There were, 17 or 19 long-term hostages, or more than 50 taken for various periods of time. But there were less than 20 who were kept for many years. And I lived with about 7 of them, off and on, in cells around Lebanon. I can't think of anybody who behaved badly. I can't. We helped each other, sometimes even to the extent of saving somebody's life. And we were certainly resources for each other. When you have nothing but another person, you're going to pick his brain. I was very good at that. I can remember Brian Keenan during one conversation, pushing him back against the wall and saying to me, "You're draining me dry," because I was asking him everything about the Irish and about the rebellion and all that. He was a Belfast boy, a Protestant supporter of the armed struggle, like Wolfe Tone. Anyway, and it's been my experience as a journalist. I've seen lots of bad guys. We all have. I've seen some people who I thought were evil, both as a journalist and as a hostage. I've seen lots more people who did what they had to do and tried to do it with a little grace and dignity. People in great danger who didn't think only of themselves, who tried to help other people. Even on occasion, once or twice, to helping protect those damn journalists when they got themselves in too deep. Ordinary people are capable of doing the most extraordinary things when they have to. And you know, you will read in the newspaper after every disaster, there'll be somebody's going to say something about looting. Ask the FEMA people what happens in those cases. And they will tell you, it's rare. People don't do that. Not very often. Remember the pictures after the hurricane in New Orleans? Okay? I'm sorry, but there were pictures of white people who were scavenging what food that they needed from the store, and there were pictures of black people who were looting. That's the truth. Most people in dire circumstances do what they have to do, and they do it with as much grace and dignity as they can muster. And that's something important to remember.
How's your kidnapping come about?
Oh, how stupid. Yeah. For most of the war, we could go just about any place we wanted and talk to just about everybody, and they would talk to us. Didn't matter who they were. Then later in the war, Hezbollah started being formed, a radical pro-Iranian group. And then it got dangerous because they didn't care if you were a journalist. In fact, in their world, being a journalist just means you're a spy for the people in charge. And we started noticing that hostility, and then the kidnapping started in Beirut of Westerners. And by the time they got around to me, most of the journalists had left. The New York Times had just assigned Kiffner. And I remember sitting in his living room, he hadn't got his furniture yet, when he told me that the Times had told him to get out. Hadn't been there 2 weeks. So there weren't very many journalists left in town. My own boss, Lou Bacardi, the president of the AP, when we met in Cairo about 3 weeks before I was taken, said, "Terry, I think you should leave. You should get out." And I said, "No, Lou, I can handle it. It's important. I want to stay." And he said, "Okay," and told me later that he kicked himself for 7 years over that. He said, "I just should have done what the Times did and told you to get on a damn plane." Because I went back to Beirut, and a couple of weeks later, they tried to kidnap me off the Corniche. I was driving back to work after lunch. Corniche is a seafront boulevard, wide place where people stroll and have coffee and stuff. And they tried to cut me off. And the car was full of young men, what Mel used to call a hamster mobile. But I got away from them. I outdrove them. I was a pretty good driver. And I had a brand new Mazda 626 with nice 5-speed. And I got away from them, they followed me, and then there was an army checkpoint up the hill. When they got near there, they disappeared. So I went into the office and I told my number 2, Gigi, and Robert Fisk, who was a good friend of mine, another journalist. I think they tried to kidnap me. I'm not sure, but I think they were trying to kidnap me. They had tried to kidnap Fisk a couple weeks earlier, and he jumped out of the car and ran away. Just left the car there. They didn't particularly want the car, so. And, you know, I said, don't tell Madeline, who was my fiance, because she'll worry. And I went home. And I got up the next morning, which was a Saturday, beautiful Saturday, and I had a tennis date with Don Mel at a club that was right near my apartment. And I went and played tennis with Don. And he was kind of nervous. He thought people were following us. After a while, you get kind of arrogant about the danger, unconsciously. You do. You do it for so long and you get away with it for so long, you think, I can do this, it's okay. I know how to do this. So we got in the car and I drove Don home to his apartment down the road, and the hamsters were back. They pulled in front of our car. They jumped out of the car with pistols, yanked open my door. I put a pistol to my head and said, get out. I said, okay, no problem. And they pulled me out, shoved me in the back of their car and drove me off. And one of them actually said that it said in English to me, the guy in the front passenger seat leaned over. I was pushed on the floor and they threw a blanket over me. He said, don't worry, it's political.
Don't worry.
Yeah, because there's a lot of speculation that Westerners were being kidnapped for money and were sold. The UPI bureau chief was kidnapped for money. They actually sent him home to get his checkbook. Yeah, and he showed up at my apartment late at night. He lived down the road. Pounded on the door, just scared to death. And I let him in. He told me what had happened. And we got him out the next morning to Cyprus, and somebody called the UPI office and said, where is this guy? He was supposed to bring us a check. That is not an exaggeration. That's absolutely true.
Well, they thought he was gonna get the money and come back and be
Yeah.
like, here, this is my own ransom.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
They have a lot of trust.
No, they were just stupid. Anyway, they took me away, and obviously I had been too arrogant. I had not taken enough care with my own safety. And I was dumb. I made a mistake, and I paid for it, as you usually do. We have a family saying in my family: if you're going to be stupid, you better be tough. Yeah.
What were some of the changes you had to deal with when you got back?
Oh, well, the last year, almost a year, I had a radio, so I caught up on the news, and I knew pretty much what was going on. And they took me to Wiesbaden, to the hospital there, and they ran me over to the PX and said, what do you want? You can have it. You need clothes, you need a suit. Here, what do you want? So the first thing I got was a CD player. I'd never seen one. And I got a CD of Vivaldi's Four Seasons by I Musicci.
Oh, nice.
And I put it on, I put the earphones in, and I went, wow. And I've been asked these questions before, and I told them, the most startling thing I ran into was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What twisted mind thought that up? The AP was very good to me. They brought in some experts in hostage decompression and PTSD, and we got counseling for several weeks. I'm a good talker, so I could convince everybody that everything was okay, and it wasn't. You just don't do that and come home and pick up your life and go on. No. So it took a long time to figure out what damage had been done to me and others, and how to cope with it. It's not necessarily healing. The psychiatrist told me it would take you as long as you've been held hostage to get over it. And they're not even sure that, and that was 7 years. And they weren't wrong. It is part of my life. It will never go away. But At this point in time, I'll be 67 next week. It's a small part of my life. I've been a professor longer than I was a hostage. I was a Marine just about the same amount of time, 6 years. And so it's part of my life, and that's where I try to keep it. And I know I've got to wind up here, so I'll tell you one last anecdote. When I came home, I said, I'm not going to hate, I'm not going to be angry, for a number of reasons. As a Christian, a Catholic at the time, I'm a recovering Catholic, it's an obligation to forgive.